It's early in the morning here at our 6-acre site. And the other day I wandered for a bit at our half-acre site, and it seemed like folks were pretty into that, so I thought it would be nice to do a little wander through this space too, as I walk around and see early in the morning. I think I just counted 8 deer running off in the woods. Pretty deer-laden landscape. Let's walk around and look at a permaculture system that is now coming into, I think this is the 13th or the 14th growing season, and what you could expect if you set something like that in motion in the Northeast or a similarly cool climate. You can see with this space we still have some lawn left. Our half-acre spot is almost completely erased of any lawn. This is my folks' landscape and they enjoy having this here. What I'm starting to experiment with is, rather than having the riding mower do the mowing work, I invested in a really nice quality grass scythe so that I can mow the lawn less frequently. I just did a little bit of test experimenting here last night, but I'll go through and mow the rest of this sometime today and rake that up, and all of this will get sent to our chickens. And my plan is to do one section each time I come up to work here. It's a really nice high quality feed for them. It's not macerated by a mower, so I should be able to get 100, 200 pounds of fresh greens for them from just this lawn space. And so I'm trying to lean into the idea of harvesting lawn as a really high value resource, but we don't need to talk about lawns much in this video. Let's look at some of the perennial systems. So here is a guild. I think I've gone over this one in detail in the past. This is a chestnut centered guild. I still have some finished pruning to do on that. I did most of the pruning work that I wanted this winter. I'm going to wait till they bud out and grow to do the finalized cut so that they heal faster. But the chestnut is our keystone in this space. This is probably a 12 or 13-year-old chestnut growing. We transplanted in a mulberry. It's got a split codominant. I imagine that this tree will pass away or need to be coppiced at some point. And the mulberry is growing up and through the chestnut, applying a little bit of pressure to them, but they seem to be compatible enough. The chestnut's leaning to the west. At some point we'll cut them back, but this just rains down a ton of fruit in the midsummer. We just plan to mow real tightly in the area right under it as it starts to drop, and then we can harvest the rest. And there's an English walnut squeezing its way through. It's a taller form tree, so we'll see if that will be compatible. We can always harvest one of these characters for firewood, but that's a nice three-way guild of some trees interacting in that space. And it's pretty informal, but the understory here has garlic and Turkish rocket as some early spring greens. The Turkish rocket as a dynamic accumulator to draw nutrients up to be chopped and dropped. You can see it's a very loose and simple mulching system of raking the leaves and putting trimmings around these trees, and the soil is deepening quite nicely from that simple system. Works pretty well. I really like the feel of the edge here. This is a main pathway that sends westbound and then splits to a whole bunch of different production areas on the far west end of the property, and it is flanked with a whole lot of different characters. On the right here, to the north of the walkway, we have a Cornus moss or cornelian cherry, and these are very lovely, shade-tolerant, beautiful trees, shrub tree type plants. There's a whole thicket of them in there. Bamboo will grow through them soon enough. We can either harvest that for food or as a green manure, or let them grow and harvest tree protecting stakes later on. But that's part of the complexity in that interior space. But this Cornus moss on the edge here is doing their thing. Really beautiful plant. We've got underneath them Solomon seal. That's this beautiful nodding plant. I think there's some daffodils throughout in there as a spring ephemeral herbaceous layer. There's cup plant and rhubarb as really nice green manure. They can be harvested with a scythe if needed, or harvested for food. And then we've just added in a nitrogen fixer on the edge, the boundary space of gumi. There's a couple gumi popping through here right on the edge. That one looks like it dried out. It was just transplanted recently. And then hidden in here is the next layer of succession. So it just looks like it's garlic mustard in there, and it is, but it is also some black currants, which are very aromatic. And with all the deer pressure we have to hide trees if we want them to have a chance. in between all this spiky bamboo that none of the deer seem to push their faces into is the next layer of succession. It's a chestnut. And we're leaving the creeping Charlie, we're leaving some of the garlic mustard to help with aromatic confusion for pests down below. There's a chestnut there, and there's another chestnut tucked in. Boy, I'm even having a hard time finding them. They're little, but they're doing their thing. They got no browse this winter. And so this chestnut is working through a jewel black-cap raspberry as another thorn layer. We've got all the spikiness. There's Turkish rocket, aromatic confuser, and dynamic accumulator, and the garlic mustard doing their work to decompact soil and make greens there, and then Siberian pea shrub as a nitrogen fixer, and Nanking cherry. Boy, a lot of characters. Many for just that area, but we pack them in, especially when they're on the edge and plants can lean out and grow. The Cornus moss will get no taller than that, so the chestnuts can grow. Eventually, they'll put pressure on the Siberian pea shrub and maybe the Nanking cherry, but that's not for another 10 years. And then we'll have wind pollination for our keystone chestnut in the middle of the lawn there. Taking a quick look at this guild, I know I made a video about the old cherry guild. That is that sweet cherry there. She's just about passed on completely. Each year there's just less and less canopy. You know, now there's just a little bit of leaves there, just a little bit of leaves there. I think the power company is planning to cut this tree down. I'm going to try to talk with them and ask them if they do, to cut down to these main branch sets and leave the trunk. It won't threaten their power line if they leave the main trunk, and it can be a beautiful habitat for creatures. As I mentioned in that video around this guild, our intent was to observe this old cherry passing away and plant the next layer of succession around them. And it looks like this will be the year that a full canopy release will happen. There's not much up there anyway, but once that's all cut down and chipped, the chips from the body of that old cherry can be redistributed amongst the complexity underneath her. You've got Titania blackcurrant, which has enjoyed the shade and will also enjoy more sun underneath here. And there are a couple other characters in here. There's a northern hardy pecan, really beautiful, huge tree, planted in 2009. That might be one of the taller trees we've set in motion. And that is a tree I planted, and this shagbark hickory was planted by a squirrel. And they're coming into bearing age as well. They're going to really appreciate that light release from the cherry passing on. Hopefully this feels like a nice reminder that in any given landscape there are trees that are growing and there are trees that are dying, and the rule of feeling like, oh, it has to be that you cut, if a tree is dying or has died, you have to cut them down, you have to completely erase them, you have to grind the stumps in order for another tree to grow, just simply isn't true. If it was up to us, we'd let this be and let the tree slowly fall apart. But since it threatens the power lines, I think they're going to cut at least the parts that are in the way. And the rest can be left as a snag to support all the birds you hear in the background. And the roots can slowly break down and feed the rest of these trees. So the shagbark hickory, the northern pecan, the English walnut, there's an apricot over there, there's a persimmon there. There are a couple Asian quince, ornamental quince. There's another Carpathian walnut, English walnut, and Japanese walnut over here. There are some hemlock trees and thimbleberries enjoying this understory. So there's a lot of complexity. None of them have been suffering for that cherry to be there. And once she goes, they'll all take off even a little bit more. Here's a power pole guild. Probably could include a vine layer, but I don't want to get in trouble with them too much. This was a pretty thoughtful guild, I would hope. Keystone species here being Siberian peach, just coming into flower. Really beautiful plant. We're hoping to be able to offer these in the fall if the rodents don't eat all the seedlings. That is our keystone, and they're being supported by this river locust, which is the nitrogen fixer and can be chop and dropped as needed. They're growing faster than the peach, and so we can prune them as needed and use them as a mulch. And understory cane layer is white currant. There's actually a couple white currants under here. We had to transplant a motherwort from another garden, so she came in as an herbaceous, aromatic, and medicinal plant to work with. And we've got sea kale tucked in as a dynamic accumulator, and an edge plant. Probably would have been better to put them right on the edge. We're missing elements on the north side, and so grass is coming in and creeping Charlie's coming in. That's fine for now. Probably the dead nettles we would leave, and then the grass we would dig out and think about a sorrel or a good King Henry or a rhubarb or a Turkish rocket or a sweet Sicily. Somebody with the morphology of deep taproot, big broad leaves, competitive to grass, and dynamic accumulating. A rhizome barrier is what we need right there. Just coming back to that old sweet cherry for a moment, and wanted to add this additional layer. Like, it is sad that she's passing on. I think, I've articulated that I'm not super sad because there's so many other characters that can fill in now. That one tree will be replaced with about 10 or so different trees. And then beyond that, we've stood out of the way when we saw seedlings, children of hers, come up in spots that were compatible with what else was going on. So almost 100% sure this is a seedling of that big, beautiful grandma tree. There's another one in another spot. Absolutely stunning, beautiful, youthful tree and loaded with flowers. So her genetics continue on in the landscape. I don't think we'd graft that tree. At some point it'll be tall enough that it'll be threatening this studio, this little shed that my mom uses. And so maybe we'll coppice or pollard them, but it's nice to see that as a tree passes on, their genetics can carry in the landscape if you allow it. This area is a little bit more feral. As time allows, we've been pulling the garlic mustard. Sometimes we're eating them. For the most part, we're pulling them and loading them into bags to give to our chickens. But they're not really that big a deal, but they're present in this landscape. And then in this context, there's a little pile of garlic mustard. I think we'll leave them there because we don't have other plants that we're explicitly trying to grow in the understory to this plum tree and under this autumn olive. So they can be a ground cover for now. They're not in the way of those black currants. The ones that were in the way of the gooseberry have been pulled and fed to our chickens to nourish them. And so the rest can remain. It's a nice nectar flow for bees. A little guild here that's on the functional side of things. There's a grafted apple that I've been shaping up to be a little bit lower so it's accessible for us. At some point we may work the scaffolds over to multiple varieties, just haven't made the time to do so. We've got a cultivar blackberry, nice thorny blackberry, makes some big beautiful fruits. And that blackberry is leveraging the body of this almond tree, which is basically a peach type tree. It's using that as its trellis. And the reason we can have that be compatible here, normally if it's a peach tree or an apple tree, I don't necessarily want to have extremely spiky plants right there because we're always getting in there to reach and harvest. But the way that this almond works, you can see up in there, beautiful flowers are forming. They make these tiny little rock-hard peaches that grow all summer, and then in the fall you shake the tree intensely and all these peaches, these dried, shriveled-looking peaches, fall on the ground with almonds inside. And so our harvest happens down here. And so as long as that thorny blackberry is trained up and into the canopy, this tree can grow as tall as it wants because the way we interact and harvest is down on the ground. And so it can be both a source of almonds and a scaffold for blackberries. And keeping everybody up high means that there's opportunity to do some yastaberry growing, to have some sorrel and sweet Sicily, some oregano, some garlic, some comfrey. And at some point this spring, we'll go through and do a little bit more thorough weeding. All these garlic mustards can be erased in here, and this can be sown out to something like a lettuce or a kale or some cilantro to be in partial shade for the summer. There's always more and more and more to look at. I think for now I'm going to pause here and get started with the day. Got some pawpaws to plant, some Kentucky coffee trees to plant, and some areas to prep up to receive some winter squash seeding a little bit later. It's going to start warming up and drying out in this landscape pretty soon, so we want to be prepped and organized for our staple winter storage crops. It's always something to work on. Let me know if you have some questions or some feedback about some of the systems you've seen here. We'll probably do a deeper dive into some of these nursery production beds in a little bit when they get fully underway. And I'll plan to make some time here or there to go deeper into some of these more complex guilds. I know there's a lot of interest there, and it's one of my key focuses in this work is thinking about these complex plant interrelationships. But for now, that's enough wandering and blabbing. This morning, it is time to start the day. Hope you all are well and growing lots of food where you live. And let us know how we can be supportive in that endeavor. Take care.